Hello and welcome. It's really great to be back with this second installment of the Fyne Conference, celebrating all the new and exciting things happening in our community. Thanks to everybody who's joined us live today. I hope that you'll find the presentations enjoyable, educational, and perhaps even a little inspiring. We've got quite a packed schedule today, as you can see. Each of our speakers is going to be connecting live from their home, so please excuse the short breaks between each talk. If you've got any questions that you would like to ask, please use the live chat alongside our video feed, our Twitter channel, or the Fyne channel on the Gophers Slack server. Most of these are linked from our website if you're not already a member. We'll try to address questions during each session, but if we miss you, then don't worry, but come and join us in the question and answer session at the end of the event. We're going to run through a number of presentations today. We're starting with a welcome and what's new in the 1.3 release of Fyne. And then there's going to be a live coding session showing how easy it is to build your first Fyne app. Then I'm very excited to say that we've got some guest speakers. Jacob is going to be presenting his project Sparta, the private way to keep track of exercise. And then Stephen will be presenting the Fyne Desk project, its latest release, and the future roadmap. We'll take a short break in the middle, allow everybody a chance to take a moment, and then start again with a discussion about how to handle cross-platform file I/O and resource handling. After that, Anthony has agreed to join us to talk about his high-level Canvas API for the Fyne Toolkit, which has got some really great looking graphs in there, so you won't want to miss that. And we'll have a presentation about the FyneTerm project and a discussion about terminal emulation. We'll wrap up with a short presentation about the road ahead and the 2.0 release that we're hoping to bring later in the year. And then, like I said, there'll be a question and answer with the team and anybody who would like to join us. The link is on our website and will be presented on the slides just before. I would love to take a moment just now to thank our speakers. Andy Williams, that's me, Anthony Starks, Jacob Althen, and Stephen Houston are going to be joining us later on. I'm so appreciative of their time and the project that they put together that they will be presenting on. Also, a massive thank you to all of our contributors and community members who built the cool things that you'll see today. We are lucky enough to have over, I think, 50 contributors on the project, and they have just done a phenomenal amount of work to make the 1.3 release possible, everything leading up to it, and also quite a lot of exciting work in progress as well. Also, I would like to thank our sponsors. Without you, it would not be possible for this project to run. There's too many to list just now, but you can find a list of them on our website. Thank you very much, everybody, for your contributions. And now, before I give you the tantalizing details of the 1.3 release, I thought it would be a good idea to have a quick recap on the Fyne project vision. We aim to be the best toolkit for easily developing beautiful native graphical applications across all platforms. Now, there are many different platforms out there, some old, some new, all targeting slightly different use cases, platforms. And we've spoken a number of times in the past about why we think it was time to create a new project. And it is our hope that we've created something here that is very easy to develop with, to learn quickly, to build your applications and to deploy across all of the graphical operating systems that are currently available for development. But more than just that aspiration, what does a good project look like? So, to be easy to learn and to discover the functionality, a project really needs to be idiomatic with the language it's written for and the systems it's targeting. The APIs that developers are going to be working with should be completely straightforward, no surprises hidden around the corners, and this code should be self-documenting as well. The Go language is a really great opportunity for this. The documentation is clear, and the community sites where this can be found are all very readily available and signposted. A good toolkit should also have a clean and simple architecture, something that a first-time contributor can get into, understand very easily, and see how they can contribute without too much trouble. It should also be extensible. A set of widgets is something that should be clean and simple, consistent, but it shouldn't stop people doing things that they would like to, or where their specifications need something different. So we should make sure that all of the built-in components are extensible for developers that want to make that additional functionality. We have chosen the material design specification to follow our designs. It's more of an inspiration than an absolute rulebook, but there's some really great information in there, so we try to use that as much as possible. Also, in this day and age, with lots of different types of screens, pixel densities, configurations, it only really makes sense to have a vector-based toolkit, which means that your graphics are going to look great on any screen. And so that's one of the principles that we think is really, really important for a modern graphical toolkit. We know also that some people prefer light themes, some people prefer dark themes. So we're going to make sure, going all the way through the project, that both of these are readily available and that anything in the main toolkit is going to look great on both. Obviously, also a consistent user experience should lead a comfortable flow through any application, and also be familiar enough that a user doesn't have to ask questions about how an application would work, look for documentation. It should be really straightforward. And lastly, a technical one here. We don't want developers to have to worry about any dependencies when they're installing an application, so no runtime dependencies at all. Now, it's not really possible to have absolutely none. You do need a graphics driver set up and running, but outside of that, we're saying that there's nothing that's going to be required for the end user. That does mean that some developers might need to install a few additional tools to be able to compile them, but it's just a one-time setup, and that means that there's no challenges for the distribution. Also, what platforms is this currently available on? Well, if you've been following the project up to now, you'll know that in the 1.2 release, we managed to include mobile support as well. And so now Android and iOS mobile platforms, Linux, macOS, and Windows desktop are all first-class citizens and fully supported all of the functionality that is in the project that you'll see today, unless otherwise noted for some work in progress reasons. We also have support for BSD Unix and the Chromebook. These are both running well, but we don't currently have them on our day-to-day test pipeline, so we know that maybe not 100% is there, but we're working on it. And if you were thinking about deploying to systems which have perhaps touchscreens on a desktop computer or physical keyboards on a mobile device, we know that there's some areas there for improvement. It works really well on some systems, and then others perhaps not. If you find one that's not working great, then do get in touch. The more devices that we can test on, the more quickly we can bring that into the fully supported category. So there we go with a quick overview of the Fyne project, what we're trying to achieve and what it is currently available on. There'll obviously be much more details later on, but I would like to move on to the current release, version 1.3, what is in it. This release was out about a week ago and represented a huge amount of work from the community. We've had some really great feedback, very positive so far. Thanks to everybody who's got in touch. Whether you love it or you think that something that could be better, it's really valuable for us to know what you feel about it, how it's working, and where you would like to be building beyond what we already have. Today, I would like to just highlight some of the exciting feature additions that we have added in this version, along with some important changes that you probably need to know about if you're looking at some of this functionality, or if you have an application that was built on 1.2 and are curious about whether the upgrade is going to catch you out at all. This is a fully backwards compatible upgrade, so there's nothing that won't work, but there are some changes that you might need to be aware of. We'll cover that briefly in a moment. The biggest feature addition for 1.3 was file dialogues. Finally, there is a way inside a Fyne application to open and save to files that the user specifies. As you can see, it's a really nice interface. It's straightforward but has the functionality that you would expect. I love what's happened there with the icons. Stephen worked really hard to bring a little detail and delight into the user interface, which really just makes a difference. The picker that you see will be presented on any desktop computer. On mobile devices, you'll probably see something different, a native picker of some sort that is part of the operating system. Those vary from platform to platform. There are certain standards that the Android system holds, and the iOS similarly is going to present something more often. It will depend on the applications that you have installed and the configuration of your platform, so I don't want to get into the details there. If you're looking to open a file, then you will probably use the new Show File Open dialog. The code you can see is presented just here. We pass into this function a callback that will return either a URI read closer that represents the content of the file that has been opened, or an error because somehow that wasn't possible. If you are using this function, obviously it's important to check the error callback, make sure that there was no problems encountered. Here we're opening a new error dialog if something happens, though you might want to do something smarter depending on why the file was being opened. And the details of how to work with files here is hidden behind File Opened, but we'll talk more about that in one of the later presentations today. Unfortunately, the save is not currently available on iOS and Android. There are certain complexities around exactly what you can write to, where data can be sent to on the mobile platforms. It will become available, but we really wanted to get this dialogue and the functionality and workflow out into the community to gather some feedback before we really committed too much more to how that might work to add save support. So feel free to let us know what you think, and we'll be adding it shortly. Next up is notifications. Now, obviously no mobile app would be complete without notification support, but also more we're seeing them on the desktop as the ability to present operating system standard notifications is becoming abundant across multiple platforms. If you've worked with these before, you might be aware of the complexities of the APIs, how they vary. So we thought it was important to have one really simple way to present notifications on any system. So here you can see at top right we have a Linux distribution. Actually it's FyneDesk showing you a notification. The middle one there is Mac OS, and then underneath we have the iOS version of the same notification. The code snippet there is showing you just how simple it is to put a little bit of content with a title into the system. The toolkit is going to use the icon and the application name associated with your app at runtime to fill in the details for you. So that's how you get the nice output that you can see below. And also, as part of this 1.3, we have a whole ton of new widgets to add, which is very exciting. The team have been working really hard on these. A particular shout out to Stuart and Tilo, who've worked really hard to bring some of these to you today. In alphabetical order, the first we have is the accordion widget. normally a little bit larger than this, but the image is taken from the widgets page at the bottom there that you can go and see for the full set of widgets available. It's helping to manage large amounts of content where you want to collapse a certain amount behind some headers, and the user could then open one of them at a time by tapping on the header. Next up is text grid. The advanced monospaced text display here is helping to create things like code editors or terminals, which we'll talk about later. It's got text styles and provides standard ways to present line numbers and the tabs and spaces inside your content. Select entry is a combination of the standard select widget where you can pick one from a list and the entry where the user can enter freeform. So here you can provide a standard list of items that can be selected from, but also give the user the opportunity to manually enter their specific value. And lastly, the split container. This allows you to divide a piece of content into two, and those can be resized left to right or up and down by the user dragging the divider, and also you can specify how much space should be made available on either side. We'll include that in the live code session that we do next. Also, we have an improved version of the user interface for the Fyne Settings app. Now, I don't know how many people have used this app. It's pretty helpful. It was introduced in 1.2 to help users manage the global state for all Fyne applications, and it can be accessed using the go-get command at the bottom there. These changes apply to all Fyne apps that are running or ones that will be loaded later. And the preview that we've added here is showing the actual size of text for the application. So when you choose a different size, the user interface rescales, but those previews stay true to what will be loaded if you choose that size. Normal here in the middle is matching the operating system setting. So an application that's loaded will now do much more work to be at the same size as your operating system. So with the standard settings on macOS or Windows, this is going to pick up your existing operating system configuration, and then you can choose bigger or smaller for your Fyne apps. Now, in addition to that, there is so much that I think we shouldn't be forgetting that came in as part of this release. We have a long list of things that were added, and a huge amount of these things came from community contributions, so thank you to everybody who was part of this. We've got support for text wrap, we've got splash windows available on desktop, image scale mode. This has made a real difference to how some retro graphics could look, and given the number of emulators and simulators that people have been using Fyne for, this just really makes those old graphics pop in a way that previously was just a little bit blurred around the edges. We've got submenus now, hover effects on the menus, and widgets can influence the cursor style on desktop, and some more advanced functionality for those people extending existing widgets as well. We've added some new test functionality as well. So if you're running unit tests on your system and you were finding that you were having to pick widgets, run methods on them, and then verify the content of the widget afterwards, well, we've got some built-in image testing now that means that you can just do that so much more easily. And of course, the ability to change the soft keyboard on mobile devices is pretty cool if you've got number fields or dates and so forth. All of these things are going to be expanded more going forward, but it was great to get that wrapped up with 1.3. Some of the changes I mentioned that I think are quite significant for a number of our developers. The first one is that we upgraded the underlying GLFW library. So if you were previously seeing deprecated warnings or strange issues to do with building, well, that might just be fixed. Most of them were wrapped up somehow in how the graphics were presented, and so the upgrade there made a big difference. We've also changed the way that rendering works so that when you move and resize a window, your content is going to continue to draw animations, or background events are going to update as you would expect. Some systems were not unfortunately working quite that well with the 1.2 release. Also, I'll pick out here that starting your application, that is calling app.run or window.show and run, is no longer supported in Go routines. It never really was, but in some systems it sort of worked. To be consistent, we've decided that that just isn't supported at all, so there's no surprise for people there. If you try to run your application that way now, it is going to panic on start. This was a tough decision for us because we don't think a library should panic ever, but in this instance, it's consistent. If you're launching in a way that we can't support, we consider this a critical failure and it's not going to be possible to boot your app. So just take that out of the Go routine and everything will be fine again. And relating to scale, Linux apps are now showing a little bit smaller text. We realized that most operating systems had headed on from the 96 DPI standard, and so we're reflecting that on the code because Linux works just a little bit differently in our driver. It gives a consistent user experience, so that settings app UI I showed you works just exactly as you would expect. And another number of other changes there regarding potential security warnings. They were all minor, but it was nice to get them tidied up. And buffer sizes and things might just have hit people with really complex applications, so that should be a big improvement there. More than 50 other additional issues were fixed in there, and that may not seem like a huge amount, but some of those were very complex, and this release was more than 1,000 commits in total. That's a huge amount of work, especially when you consider that the project up to version 1.2.4 was only just over 2,000 commits. So that's a huge amount of extra effort above what was there before. So thanks everybody for your involvement. Now, alongside that release of the library, we have an updated developer site as well. We got a lot of feedback from the community that it was better to find a single place for documentation where it's all available with tutorials and examples for the toolkit, along with other possible snippets. Maybe troubleshooting is something that you could find in there as well. We wanted also to finally version our API documentation. The standard websites out there that the Go project has are really fantastic for the latest version of everything, but we're aware that as the toolkit evolves, particularly as we look forward into the future, the possibility of breaking API changes down the road, we wanted to know that the documentation was clear for the version that you're using, and that allowed us to include release notes, change guidance if you're upgrading. There's a little document in there that will help you jump from one major version release to another, covering, I suppose, most of the little items that I've mentioned earlier today, but a couple of other nuggets that might be relevant to you. And there is way more to come there. We've got lots of good ideas and people who are well ready and raring to put more content into the developer site. I don't want to really tease too much about what's going in there, but just keep your eyes peeled. The site's going to flesh out, and if there is anything that you think that we've missed, if you think we could be doing better, or something that you find might even be broken in that new site, do just get in touch. We'd love to add lots more content, and as long as you're not wanting somebody to write your app for you, you might find that a common question turns into an example that is then put on the website to share with everybody else. Well, there you have a roundup of what's new in 1.3, what's happening in the community. I hope that's been helpful. We're going to move on now to how easy is it to build your first Fyne app. But we're slightly ahead of schedule, and in case anybody is dipping into this at a particular time, we'll just hold on for a couple of moments before I get started with this next part. Remember, if you've got any questions, there's the chat room, the live channel, and I'll do my best, as will the other speakers, to cover them when they come up. and thanks very much for joining us for the next session. Hope that wait wasn't too long if you've been with us from the beginning. I'd just like to move on now to the live code session. It's something that is highly unrecommended for an event like this, but let's see what we can do. So hi, my name is Andrew Williams. I've been contributing to the Fyne project since it was founded 2.5 years ago now. In the presentations today and at previous events, the Fyne team have talked about how easy it is to build an app with Fyne. But today I wanted to go a step further and show how true that is. I'm going to build from scratch a full cross-platform application comprising user interface, business logic, and some local persistence. And I'm going to try and squeeze the tests in as well if we've got enough time. So we'll need a little bit of setup first. If you don't currently have a Go installation and a C compiler, you're going to need that before you can run through this code. I'm not going to go into it in detail here because it is platform specific. If you go to that Getting Started section on the developer website for Fyne, you'll find all of the details there, and it will try to hint which the right steps are for you based on the system that you're browsing from. Once that's installed, you would then need to get the Fyne toolkit installed. We use -u to make sure you're always getting the latest version, and the import URL is just fyne.io/Fyne. Nice and easy. And then open your favorite development environment. Visual Studio Code is great. Golang is another favorite. Others are available. It's your choice. I'm going to use Visual Studio this time. It is just a little bit easier, I think, to present on these screens. And here we go. Let's try some live code. I will just switch over screens. And there we go. So let's get started. I'm going to create a new folder for this application. I thought it would be great to do a notes app, something pretty straightforward. I think we can all imagine what that might be. You've got a list of the available notes on the left, the content on the right, and some buttons or a toolbar to add them, and they'll just change as we edit them. So dragging that into Visual Studio, we've got our workspace set up. I'm going to add a new file here, main.go, and away we go. Now this is a simple application, so package main is going to get us started, and a main function is all that we need to have an application that runs. Now, first of all, we need to set up a Fyne application. So we do app.new, and that is going to set up all of the appropriate drivers at runtime. We then want to create a window, and I realize now that we haven't imported. If I save the file, then Visual Studio is going to do the importing for us, and then we could do new window like that, notes. You might notice I'm just using one-letter variables here. It's not something that I do super frequently because I think code should be really easy to read. But when you're loading a Fyne application, I mean, the app is always the first thing and then the window comes next. So in this instance, probably not a big deal. We will need to set some content. So we'll call set content on the window, and we'll write that in a moment in a new function called load UI. And then we would show, because it's the first window we're going to show, I'll use the convenience function show and run, which will show the window and then run the application as well. It's important that the function you call run is in the main function, like I mentioned earlier, and so it should usually be the last thing there as well, because it's going to not return until your application is finished running. So we save that again, and the only warning we have is that there's no content. So we'll do that now. Load UI is going to return a canvas object. That is part of the standard Fyne API. It means anything that can be displayed, and so we're not committing to exactly how the user interface is going to function. So I think that we are going to have a list of notes. So for this, we will use a vertical box. And into that, we will quickly add a couple of labels. And you can see once the import is there, it's suggesting all of the different widgets that match. So we'll have item 1, and then item 2. Great. We will want content. Now, this could be a text view or something, but because we're going to want to edit these notes on the fly, I thought let's do an entry, a multi-line entry probably. There we go. And we want to split the two, so the view, the UI is going to be a new split container, a horizontal one, so they're left and right, and we will put the list on the left and the content on the right. Nice and easy. We could then return the UI. That's everything set up. But I don't want an even split down the middle. I want the list to be smaller. So let's just say that the offset should be 1/4, 0.25. There we go. So that's the very basic setup. If I just load a terminal, here we are. I can run our application, and there we go. It's pretty small though. Let's fix that. So once we've got the content, we can make it a little bit larger. So you might have noticed there that the toolkit is always packing the content on its minimum size available. We want a little bit larger. So new size, 300 by 200. That should do. Also, I think it would be nice to have a toolbar. There we can put our buttons. New toolbar. And let's put 2 actions in there. New toolbar action. We will use the standard theme here and load the one moment there. The import isn't automatically coming in, probably because I have a syntax error at the moment. Content add, and another toolbar action, content remove. And the function that we're passing here is what will occur when the item is tapped. It doesn't do anything just now. Oh, and the icon is a return from a function. Now we need to use the bar. So instead of having a list on this side, we probably want a left panel. I'm going to add a container here with a particular layout. So again, we'll use a new package here, layout, new border. Now the border layout works by specifying the top, bottom, left and right components, and anything else is in the center. So at the top we'll have the bar, and then the other 3 edges will have nothing. And then we need to say the bar and the list, which is going to be the main content. And then we will add that left part to our user interface. And if we run it again, there we go. We have our items, a toolbar, and our content area. Great. So next we want to add a note, content. I'm going to create another file here for the note, also in package main. Now from here, I'm going to make a really simple type, I think. It's a struct. We're just going to have, I think, content. Don't want to get into too much metadata in this example, but the buttons on the left are going to want to have a title, probably. So let's add a title function to the note type, called title, I suppose. Now, that's going to want to return, if there's no content, then let's return untitled. This is going to need to return a string. And let's think, if there is content, then we're going to want to return the top line. So if we have, ooh, I missed the n dot for that content. We're going to split the note on the new line character, and I've chosen split n so we don't work through the whole string. That's asking how many output parts would we like. Going to split just once, so there's 2 parts there. And because there is some content, we know that there's at least going to be 1 element, so we can return the 0th element there. Excellent. So that's there. Now, before we put that into our user interface, let's be good citizens and write a test. One of the ambitions of this toolkit is that it's all testable. Especially unit tests on user interfaces are famously difficult, but we're trying to support that as best we can. Might not have time to run through that all today though, but let's just put a quick one in here. Test note title, and we will import testing to pass it as a parameter. That's a standard test in Go. We will make a note with content of 1 line, and I like the assert package from Stretcher. There, Testify is the project, really helpful. I know that they're not truly needed to have a test framework like this, but I like the way that it reads. So we pass the test context in. We want to make sure that this note is the title for that note. So we will do that. Then we will make another new note, this time overwriting the variable with 2 lines. Line 2. We should probably mark it as content there. And assert.equal. We want the title to be line 1 here for n.title. Now, if we go test, excellent. So we know that our note type, as simple as it might be, is working. So if we go back to our main here, we currently have 2 fake items and nothing really in the content. So let's load the UI passing in a list of notes. Let's make that list just manually. Notes, oh, yeah, notes. Make it clear what this list is going to be. Is a list of note types, and we will make one which has content of my first note, and another Now, this is just a shorthand here. We could do that if you prefer the clarity, but it's not really needed here. A little comma at the end of the line, and we'll pass the note list into the UI. So this now takes a list of notes. Now here, this box is going to want a list of items instead. So let's construct that. Actually, instead of constructing an item list, let's take a little shorthand here and just append them to the existing list. So we don't need the index, we need the note in the range of notes passed in. Let's call that notes actually. For each of those, we want to make a new item in the list. So as before, we could say the label or item is new label, and that is going to use n.title, and then list append item. Perfect. And whilst we're at it, why not see if we can add something to the content. If there was a note, then set text to be notes content. Now, if we run this, there we go. It's loaded from the note list. Nice. Now, to be able to switch notes, we're needing to add a little button. So instead of the label, we're going to use a button. Now, we do need to capture this n variable because of the way that the for loop works in Go. So note is n. Then we can add a new button instead. And a button has a callback, which is the content. Oh, no, it doesn't. Sorry, that's an entry. Button just has an empty function callback. And when the button is tapped, we're going to want to set note to n, pretty much. Now, we don't really have a set note. And that is going to want to take a note. We don't have access to what we want to put the content into. Really, I want to just say set text n.content, but we don't have access to content. Now, if this was a larger application, you would probably have a type for the application that would hold its state, but because it's just a demo to be run through quickly, I'm just going to declare a variable here. So the content is a global variable to this application, and because we want to know what we can do, we're going to name it as a widget.entry so we can make use of it later. And now we can see that the content is working just fine. This is the content being set up, so to mark it into the global, we'll just do that, and that should work nicely. I see note isn't being used. I'm glad it pointed that out to me, or we would have had a very strange result. So note is now being used. If we go run, then that's the first note. That note has many lines. Oh, fantastic. It's looking like an application. Now, from here, we could do so much more. Really, the note list here is where we want to go. So we would need something like a new type for note list. Note list. and that just has some notes in it like this. So it's pretty much what we had before, but we can make functions on it. So on note list, we might have add, and maybe that would return a new note. And note list remove, and you would specify the note to remove. Now, I can't really see time to implement all of these fully, unfortunately, but our note list, call that notes. So the new note is a new simple new note there. We want to add it to the list of notes, but to the top, not to the bottom. So notes, set it up to append, not to the end. We need to append it to the top. So we make a new list of notes comprising the top note, and we add it to the remaining list, which is notes, but we need to convert it to the var.args version, and then new note is returned. Little unit test around that would verify that it's working all right, but I'm going to quickly charge ahead. Our toolbar here would then add when it's tapped. So we have the note list up here, notes, it's currently a list of notes. Let's make it actually a note list. Notes, notes, notes. Note list containing a list of notes. Pass that in. From here, we can say that, oh, I've doubled up on that, haven't I? Let's just call it L for now. L dot add. And when we add a new note, we want to set it as the current note. Need to just update that to the list. And this is a note list, sorry. Now, notes and L.notes. Almost there, almost there. Oh, wrong symbol. So this creates a new note, but it doesn't update our list. So the next thing we would need to do is update that list. Data bindings in 2.0 would mean that that could be done for us, but unfortunately we're not there. Now, I am just super running behind here, unfortunately. The project that I was working on, the next step after that was to use the app preferences so that we can store and load. Every app has a preferences there, you see. And on preferences, we can load and save variables, and we could store our notes in there. Gonna have to stop here, unfortunately, and move on. But the information, that should have been a really good starter, I hope. Let's just pop back here and resume the presentation very quickly before I hand over. Here we go. Oh, I'm really sorry we didn't get that finished. Didn't even cover packaging. So if you had finished the application, let's just assume, then you would get the Fyne command line helper from that URL there, and you could package the app into a full desktop application. If you're on Mac, it would create an app bundle. If you're on Windows, it would create an executable and package up the metadata for you. And then you could take it to mobile. you would just specify different operating system on the package command. They do need an app ID. It's part of the metadata process, the requirements for distributing on the Apple and Google Play stores, amongst others. But it's pretty straightforward. You can see the command line there. If you would like to see this project through, take it further, or really understand the full code that we were trying to do, I think you saw this was the application we were building. The full source code as it currently stands, which is that, plus you can see we highlighted the current note, and those notes were stored in the local storage. It's all available at that GitHub project. You can run it, add your own functionality, install it, test out the Fyne toolkit, no bother at all, whatever you would like to do. I'm sharing this under the same permissive license that all of the Fyne project is, so you can use it for open source or private projects. You can extend it, work on it yourself. You don't have to tell us what you're doing or share it, but please do if you would like to. Lastly, clearly I need more than 20 minutes. I'm going to be starting Twitch live streaming of Fyne code. You can find me at that URL, and hopefully I'll be able to actually squeeze it into the right time. Thank you so much for that. A little bit whistle stop, but in a rather more well-prepared manner. I'm really happy to hand over to Jacob next, who's going to tell us about his Sparta application. So if you just bear with us a moment whilst we switch live streams, we'll be right back. Thank you.
Just need to see if we can get some audio here. Perfect, it looks like we have audio. So, yeah, thank you hello everyone, I would like to say thank you first to the Fyne team for letting me share this presentation and talk about my Sparta application. So, my name is Jakob Asén. I'm a Swedish student, Go programmer, runner, and a privacy advocate. So, I got into open source around 4 or 5 years ago, I think, and that was thanks to the Brave browser at the time. And that's also the reason why I care so much about privacy in general. So, then around 2-3 years ago, I started using Linux, thanks to hopefully privacy benefits. And I started doing some like packaging updates, and then 1.5 years ago, I decided on that I should start programming. And 1.5 years later, I decided to jump ship and switch full-time to Go. So here I am. I've got lots of exciting stuff to share with you, so let us dive right in. So, like I said, the application is called Sparta, and it is about encrypted logging of sport activities. And you might wonder why. And Sparta generally grew out of the need for a private exercising platform. I should say, I love exercising, I love running, I love mountain biking and such, because I find it to be a very fun way to stay healthy. And I love the competitive aspect of keeping track of my exercises. I want to push myself. I want to know how far I've been running, how fast, and all that sort of thing. But at the same time, I don't want the whole world to know about my activities. I mean, my health and my running and such, that's my own data. Nobody else should have access to it. So, if you dig a bit deeper, you'll find that there's a general lack of privacy in platforms out there. You have like Strava or Runkeeper, and none really care about privacy that much. So that's where Sparta comes in. And if you wonder about the name Sparta, we were working with antique Greece, so I just chose Sparta and tried to make something that could turn into Sparta, so it's sport and rehearsal tracking application. And the idea came to me when we were forced to log down or log all our gym sessions because we got gym cards from a school. And it was all done via a service called Funbeat, and it has now shut down because it was very old, didn't use HTTPS, so it was unencrypted, serving data unencrypted between the server and such. And it didn't really take GDPR into account, which is quite big here in Europe nowadays. So I was chatting with a couple of my mates and complaining a bit maybe. And they said, well, make something better. And that was precisely what I set off to do. And like you might understand, I chose Fyne for the development. But why is a totally different question to ask, so let's dive into that. I decided quite early on that I wanted to make a native application because I wanted to minimize like internet traffic, because I find it to be possibly another attack vector to analyze traffic going to and from computers and such. And let's be honest, I had no idea about how web programming worked, so it was just easier to start with a native application. And choosing the toolkit was not that hard in hindsight, because looking at like all of the bindings for Qt5 and GTK plus 3, they were very like hard to get started with and required some runtime dependencies, and in general it was just quite bad because you see that it's not really made to be used with Go, and Fyne is, so it's very easy and simple to get started with, yet very powerful and advanced when needed. And that's very like important for someone like me who at the time had less than 1 year of programming experience when I started this program in December last year. And then as I grew and got more development experience, I could use more of the advanced features. So I love Fyne for how easy and good it is with the advanced features. And it also allowed me to generally do some rapid prototyping without much effort in general. So more on that on the next slide. The first prototypes of the application were very basic. So it was handled in memory, no login support, no encryption, and it was probably done in less than a couple hours actually. You saw how fast you can make an application from the example from Andrew. And then, well, later on I added basic login, encryption, and file system support. And that was by far the hardest part in development so far, but I'll now show you one of the initial implementations. So this is the beginning of Sparta. You just type in a username and a password. And this old prototype login support just had support for one user, and if you typed anything else in, it would error. So it was very basic. And it was just a VBox, and the topmost slot has a button, and below that it's just a big label that expands when you add new exercises. So you press the button, you get a dialog where you can type in the information about it and then press submit, and you're done. So carrying on here, the next step in making the application better was to add a user-friendly interface. Because let's be honest, the first interface wasn't that good. And well, when making an interface, you need to like take into account that it should be easy to use and understandable to the user. They shouldn't need to have a big handbook about how to use your application. It should just make sense, as if they had used the application before. And it needs to be stylish. I mean, it's 2020, we can't really make an application that looks like it's from the 90s, right? So I decided on using tabs, and thankfully Fyne has great support with built-in material design icons in the theme package, and that just makes the whole application look 10 times better in my opinion. So I'll show one of those implementations. So you just log in, same login support as before, and we have quite empty exercise. Like I said, we're prototype at that stage. So we have the activities homepage where it's still a label, but you have the little home icon, and there's an add activity tab where you have the date and all the stuff you need here, and also like sets and reps if you're at the gym, and a comment field, and a console so you can clear out all fields. And this is just a form widget in the Fyne toolkit. And then there's settings. You can change theme between light and dark, and like you see, it just switches the colors of the icons automatically. Very nice. And there's support for changing passwords and removing all activities. So yeah. And well, you might realize that there's also a need to share data between devices. Let's say you take your phone with you when you're going for a run. You then just type in what you've been doing and you have it saved on your phone. But you don't really want to type in the exact same thing on the Sparta on your computer because, well, you don't want it to type it twice. So that's where sharing or synchronization comes in. So I looked around trying to find something that I could use to make this easier, and I used the wormhole implementation in Go called Wormhole William. It's end-to-end encrypted local file transfer, and it's made by Peter Sanford. You can find it here on his GitHub. It's a great product. Next up was just making what I see as the perfect login screen. I wanted to look good on like all platforms and not just on desktop. So thanks to the right ones run everywhere philosophy that Fyne has, as long as you can compile to the right target, it's quite easy to use it everywhere, and it should look good everywhere too. And I tried to make a desktop logins field that looks like what you might find on a website, but sadly that doesn't look that good on mobile devices, because as you might see here, typing something in here and then dragging it out, it expands horizontally but doesn't expand vertically, and this doesn't look very good on a mobile phone because it gets terribly small. That's why I chose a different direction for making this. Fyne has support for checking if we are using the mobile driver. So what I decided on doing is we're checking if we are using the mobile driver, and if we are, we will then just use a totally different layout. It's the same VBox here in the middle, but instead it's a grid with these 3 slots where top and bottom it has like spacers from the layout package. And as you see here, when we resize it, it looks much better on a mobile phone than what the original implementation did. And there also generally was a need for making the backend more secure. The first parts of the application were very basic, and it needed a total rewrite of the backend code, because in the beginning it was using SHA-256 for hashing the password and username, and that's not really cryptographically secure because SHA-256 isn't a key derivation function or algorithm for that matter. So I switched to using Aragon 2, which is generally said to be the best in class at the moment. And I've always been using AES-256 encryption, which is generally like military grade standard. And of course I need to use a good implementation to minimize the risk of compromising data. Because right now it switches the encryption keys on each application restart, and I also at the time also added support for adding more users, and it can handle probably unlimited amount of users as long as you have space on your file system. But please also do note that I'm not a cryptographer and the program hasn't gone through any security reviews yet. I hope to get some in the future if there's enough people that want it and if there's interest, I'd say. But speaking about the future, what's the future of Sparta? Well, I'll be releasing it as open source under the GNU Affero General Public License. It will be free as in freedom and free as in no cost, and it will always stay free. And it will be available at github.com/jackals/Sparta. It's still work in progress, but please take a look at it if you want. It's not open source yet, but I will do that just after this presentation. I also have some plans and wishes for the future when it comes to features inside the application. I'd like to implement a custom widget for displaying exercises, because right now, like you said, saw in some of the earlier prototypes, it's just a label with some fancy text added, and it doesn't look all that professional, in my opinion, but it works. And I'd possibly like to get an exercise recorder with timer and maybe some GPS support, so you can just press start recording an exercise on your phone and then go for a run or something, and it will keep track of how far you've been running and such. I don't know how easy that is to do in Go, and depending on mobile platforms, iOS and Android, but it would be fun to get that implemented. And some statistics support to show you what you've been doing with your exercising, to possibly give some more source of trying to push you forward wanting to do more exercises. I actually have an old prototype of that, so it's very work in progress, but it's something at least. Don't mind that red screen, it's fixed with latest version of Fyne. So here's just a pie chart of showing you what kind of exercises you've been doing in the latest month. This is just some testing thing, it's nothing special, and it's all in Swedish, sorry. But running on the treadmill, some normal running, a gym session, and some swimming. Medley is just a place in Sweden, a company. So you'll find that this is what you've been doing with your exercises. And this is the current version of Sparta. So you can create a new user, just log in, and you'll see an exercise here. You can add exercises, synchronize, and version 1.3 of Fyne has text wrapping, which is nice, and don't mind the flickering there. And settings, basically the same. You can change username also now that there's a need for it when you can have multiple users. And an about page. So that's my talk about Sparta. Thank you everyone for listening. Next up is Stephen Houston, who's going to talk about FyneDesk. Please give us a couple moments while we get him set up for the stream. He'll be live soon. Thanks.
Hello, I am Stephen Houston. I'm one of the core developers with Fyne and FyneDesk. If you did the Fyne Conference in the fall, you might remember I did a presentation on FyneDesk. Since then, we've done a few things to stabilize it and put out a release. And of course, we do have our develop branch, which is a good bit ahead and has a lot of features and a lot of modernization for FyneDesk. I apologize if my voice doesn't sound great. I'm a little under the weather today, but we're going to get through it. My slides here do not have a lot of graphics because I figure at the end I'll just show in real time anything I cover rather than using images. I would probably say FyneDesk is currently one of the biggest projects out there using Fyne as far as an application goes. Unfortunately, for obvious reasons, it is not a cross-platform application because it's specifically for Linux desktop currently. It's a Linux desktop environment in case you don't know what it is. And it does window management, it does application launching, it does taskbars, notification management, anything like this that you would expect your normal Linux desktop to handle. So with that being said, we can jump right in to talking about what was in the 0.1.3 release. The first thing we did was we added initial support for BSD systems, FreeBSD, NetBSD, OpenBSD that are out there. FyneDesk should run and be supported on any of the BSDs, which is cool. I think I just spent a lot of time saying that this was Linux only, but BSD too. We improved wording for the account menu when in embedded mode. So embedded mode is you can actually run FyneDesk on any platform, Windows, Mac, or anything like that to get an embedded mode. It will not do any window management or anything like that. It's just more of a demo or more of a helper for if we're doing development and we're on a different platform and we need to see a visual change or something like that we've done. We added a app bar configuration screen. We have an app bar that is full of icons that you can launch and also manages tasks, serves as a taskbar as well. And we added a configuration screen for that app bar that looks quite nice and allows you to decide what your default applications are in there and what the size and scale of the icons is and the icon theme used and that sort of thing. We updated the default background for a winter scene. Obviously that happened back in the winter and we're not in the winter anymore, so we may be changing that, but there is support for choosing and picking your own background, so you don't have to stick with the winter scene that we added. We did rename the FyneDesk package on GitHub. It was desktop, and in order to be more consistent with our naming and with Fyne and with the fact that we call Fyne Desk. We renamed the package from Fyne.io to desktop. We changed that to Fyne Desk. Hopefully you didn't see that bump in the road and you just kind of pulled in the change automatically. But if you didn't and you've been wondering where your Fyne Desk repository is or why it hasn't been updated, perhaps you were on the old one and you would like to pull down the new package. And it is Fyne.io or on GitHub, Fyne-io Fyne Desk. There were a lot of fixes in 0.1.3 that really went to stabilize Fyne Desk. We had some issues with Goland, losing focus on mouse click. It's possible that any of these fixes that we did that were application specific also fixed other applications that we just weren't aware of. For the instance of Goland losing focus on mouse click. Well, we were trying to focus Goland on mouse click because we do click to focus in Fyne Desk, but a lot of applications also would rather manage their own focus within the application. So once we give it an original focus, we've got to pass the focus request to the application for the application to do as it pleases rather than automatically focusing as it goes. So that was the Goland fix, and that's a good example of how I'm sure there's other applications out there that were fixed by that. We had some flickering on window borders. We fixed that. We added a lot of sizing fixes for windows where you can't resize smaller than the minimum requested window size, and you can't size out past the maximum screen size, and this would also block maximization of windows more than just manually resizing. If the screen size is larger than the max size of the window, we'll turn off maximization, which we do visually through a disabled max button. You'll see that on fixed size windows too. So some nice visual hints there and fixes added. We updated to the latest Fyne release so that we pulled in the new scale work that we've been doing on Fyne, which is a cleaner way of handling scale, and I've seen a lot of questions about it. I'm not sure if Andy or anybody else has covered it or if they're going to cover it, but rather than simply having a user configured scale, we kind of take a operating system configured scale, and we allow a user scale to be put on top of it, and we combine the two to generate what our output scale is going to be. One of the big things is it gets the initial scale you'll see before configuring Fyne a lot closer to what the rest of the applications and things you're seeing on your desktop are. It really does get that initial scale right, but it does still allow you to configure. I know we had questions about did we remove the ability to configure. No, we didn't. If your system scale was 1 and you configured to a scale of 1.5, you're going to have a net scale of 1.5. What we do is with the user configuration is we take anything above 1 as being a plus and anything below 1 as being a minus. So if your user scale was 0.5, your net scale with system would be 0.5, 1.0 minus 0.5. So that's kind of how it works. Still there, you can still configure. It just helps get the initial scale correct, and it's really important and matters on the desktop project. Where we're doing a lot of things with scale, especially multi-screen, and trying to get it right, and also get it right across multiple toolkits. Drag and drop targets not found for many applications, so we got drag and drop working for most applications. There's still one that's not working. We'll figure it out and get it fixed and develop here soon. But most applications now can handle drag and drop. VLC was opening a lot of different windows, or at least it would appear so if you were following your taskbar. We fixed that. I'm sure that fixed other applications as well. There was a lot of graphical glitches when using Qt apps if our scale was less than 1. So that was certainly something that was possible. Again, if we had a system scale of 1 and we had a user scale of 0.5 and we were scaling down to something small, we were getting glitches graphically, visually with Qt, and we figured out that the Qt scale factor doesn't accept or take a scale of less than 1. So we fixed that. We improved loading of Mac OS apps and icons in embedded mode. Again, you're not going to get any window management or any real features of Fyne, but you will be able to see some of your Mac applications and icons as stubs. Let's talk a little bit about the develop branch. This is kind of where we work off of when we're developing Fyne Desk. It's going to be your most up-to-date place. It's going to have the coolest features. It's also going to have it's also going to be less stable, as it is the feature development arena for what we're doing. I still use it daily and find it to be stable enough to use, but it will not be as stable as a release, obviously. But that's where we are, and that's where we keep the development going. We have some cool things hanging out in the develop branch right now. Andrew added module support so that we can have external modules or things like that, internal, external modules written that we can load into Fyne Desk. Currently, we have 2 different kinds of modules. We have status area modules and we have screen area modules. The status area modules will go in the status area, which we'll see when we kind of do a demo of Fyne Desk here in a minute. And the screen area module can go anywhere on the screen, basically cover the background, however it's configured. We've worked on the XR&R multi-head support with scaling, specifically done a lot of work with mixed DPI. You know, if you have one normal DPI monitor and one high DPI monitor, you know, how are applications moving between the two? How do they look? What the scale on each monitor is? This kind of thing. So we did a lot of work with that. We improved the package structure, which isn't a visual change of Fyne Desk or anything like that, but we sat back and Andrew and I did a lot of talking about, you know, what the different packages within Fyne Desk looked like from a code standpoint, what our separation or encapsulation was, how we were going to look at that, and how we could set it up to where we could build it out in the future to possibly support further things or further backends or that kind of thing, and be able to reuse, maximize the most amount of code that we could. So that was a big change. It was kind of a tedious change, but we did it to improve our code base going forward, which is something we always feel is important, is having the right structure and base to build on as you develop forward. We did some improved UI in certain places that's in the develop branch, whether it be in the settings panel or borders or buttons or icons, that kind of thing, just some tweaks here and there. And then we spent a good bit of time lately doing specific application fixes. We talked about in the 0.1.3 release how we had some specific fixes for Goland. We've got more of those type of fixes on our develop branch. I think when you are developing a window manager and it's something that Andrew and I have done a lot. One of the ways that you develop is, you run your applications, your day-to-day applications, you see how they go. Other users are running their applications. Nobody exactly runs the same set of applications, and you see problems or you see bugs or areas that need to be fixed as you run your applications, and you address those problems from a standpoint of getting the X code behind it to support that application. And so while it may appear that we're fixing one specific application, which was the point, it's probably fixing a lot of other applications that we're not even aware of. But from just a testing standpoint, a day-to-day use standpoint, that's seemingly how you get a lot of your fixes and problem areas identified and fixed. So that's something we do pretty often. We could talk about the roadmap for the future, kind of where we're looking at going just from conversations and talking, and we'll continue to do, like I just mentioned, application fixes. We'll continue running applications. The more users that jump on and use FyneDesk, the better. They'll have their own sets of applications. They'll find and identify problems, and we'll get in there and fix them. And that's how we stabilize more and more going forward. System tray. We're going to add a system tray. It's something that is very requested. I think we'll probably do it in tandem with adding some kind of tray support to Fyne, so that Fyne applications can create system tray icons or tray area icons. There's some debate about it with it being cross-platform and how it's handled on mobile, but we'll get it all figured out, and that's probably when it's going to hit. One of the things I didn't mention in the develop branch is we've added a layer over dbus that gives us the opportunity to tap into a lot of the dbus stuff that a Linux desktop could take advantage of, whether that be policy kit for authorization, notifications, application notifications that go in the notification area. Well, I think one of the next steps is networking support, so we can use our dbus layer to tap into Network Manager, for instance, and set up a module for networking support, which is a goal there. I say here default applications written in Fyne, but that's kind of as we keep building out and we add like networking support and we add modules and we add default applications written in Fyne. What we're looking at is really creating or developing an application ecosystem, so it's not just the desktop of FyneDesk, but if you so choose, you get a pretty good ecosystem of Fyne apps to go with it, and a very visual, pleasing experience because of that. And then the two big ones we always get asked about that, yes, they're on the agenda for some point. We're thinking about them. We're talking about them. Yes, we know that compositing is a big thing, and we know that Wayland is a big thing that we would like to support, and we're going to get there. They're big changes. When we do things like rethinking our package layout and our file hierarchy and what we have in different types and interfaces within our code, and we redo it like we've done recently to be able to build out, we're thinking about things like Wayland. That's what's on our mind. How much of this is X specific, how much of this is Wayland specific, and how much of this can we share between the two? Those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about and that do cross our mind. So it's there. We're thinking about it. We're working on it. It's going to happen. There's not a date yet or a specific release in mind, but it's on the way and it's going to happen. So that's kind of an update of where we are with the release, where we are on the develop branch currently, and what we're looking at doing in the future for FyneDesk. So what we can do is we can take a look at Fyne Desk, which you're now seeing. The entire presentation was ran through Fyne Desk. Just a quick look here at GoLand. You can see kind of our layout, and you can see how we have separated window client frame stuff from WM window manager specific things. That's just an idea there of one way in which we're doing separations, hopefully thinking that maybe this window section can be something that we can reuse, whereas the window management section may be more specific as we look at things like Wayland. We talked about the app bar, and you can see how you can remove icons from there. You can add icons that are sitting here in the taskbar area. It's got a nice little animation to it. You have this application launcher. You can type. You get filled in with responses. You click to open. And you've got your applications there. Your user menu down here in the right. You can kind of see an about page for Fyne Desk. And then we can get into the settings, which is where we made some changes for 0.1.3 as well as others. You've got scale settings here. You can change your scale. I'm on small scale currently, but you can go large and get a refresh there of what's going on, and you can see now by looking at the app bar and our settings screen that the scale has been adjusted. You look at appearance, we can choose icon themes. We can choose a background image using our new file dialog that was introduced in Fyne. The app bar configuration screen, we can add icons, we can delete them, we can change the order in which they are displayed. We can control icon size and how they zoom when moused over. Anything like that. You can see the launcher works. We have a Alt tab for switching between all of our different open applications. And as you Alt tab, it'll focus the different windows that you Alt tab between. So that's kind of an overview where we're at. It's quite usable. I think I'm out of time here. I wish I could have gone through more. Perhaps I should have talked less and done more demonstration. But you are welcome to come hang out in the Fyne Desk channel on the Gophers Discord. Install it, give it a try, play with it. It's a lot of fun. It's pretty stable. It works well, and feel free to contribute to it as well. And we do have other videos out there on our YouTube channel if you want to see more of Fyne in action. At this point, we are going to take a break, 10-15 minute break, and then we'll be back with more presentations. So I'm going to stop my stream now, and we'll be back in 15 minutes or so.
Hi, I hope everybody's having a good day. I know that we're not started yet, but I thought we could just have a little intermission. This is a great game that's somebody's provided available online, and they said, yeah, we could bundle it in a Game Boy emulator. Thanks so much for the creators of Dino's Offline Adventure. It's super fun. You can go check out the Fyne Game Boy project on my GitHub account if you're interested. Anyway, we'll be back in a couple of moments. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for the short break there. I hope that you enjoyed the first half of today's event and are looking forward to learning a bit more and seeing some cool presentations in the second half as well. I wanted to start part 2 with a topic that we found quite difficult to really figure out how to get the right API for 1.3. A lot of community discussion about how much of this should be standard Go API, how much of it did we really need to be managing in our own particular way. This is file handling. It's the oldest thing that many apps will have been doing, but there are many reasons why the standard os.file isn't necessarily the right fit, and how you can avoid cross-platform headaches by following a few simple practices. So, yeah, file handling, cross-platform I/O. Why is it so difficult? We'll cover that in just a moment. We'll look at using the file dialogues that we mentioned earlier in the 1.3 release to open your files into an application. And we'll talk about saving to files through user-selected output in a file dialog as well. We'll also discuss how to access files directly, so that is not wishing for the user to have to choose a file, but you know where you're looking to access data from or write to. We'll talk about that. And we'll cover the URI type that was introduced as part of these changes and how to manage data sources. And wrap up with a little selection of things to remember when managing files in your application that should hopefully get your application to be as portable as possible, so you can take advantage of the cross-platform capabilities of Fyne. So yeah, let's think for a minute. Why is this so difficult? Well, to start with, not all of the standard file operations are possible on all systems. There are a number of protected areas, for example, across certain systems. You might find that permissions vary. There are even platforms that require you access specific privileges to read any files, not just system protected files that you might be familiar with on your desktop. Different file systems and operating systems have different ways of addressing files. We all know this, but it does impact portability if you aren't entirely certain what sort of address system will be used on the runtime when you're writing your application. Like I mentioned, there's permission issues sometimes relating to systems or specific directories. Anybody who has used a recent version of macOS will be familiar with this application wants to access your downloads folder, or if you have developed a mobile application, you'll probably be aware that having a pointer to a file, a handle to a file object, isn't enough to read from it. You need to say, I would like to be accessing this external resource. And also, especially on mobile and embedded platforms, not all data sources are going to be files. Now, of course, there's plenty of data that we understand, data streams, byte streams, remote resources that we're used to managing without file pointers. But on a native mobile file picker, perhaps, you could be being returned what the user thinks is a file, but actually it's not. It's a bundle of data, it's a content that has come from some other resource, some application that you had installed elsewhere that knows how to deliver that sort of data to other applications. So that's why it's difficult. You know, there's all sorts of things to bear in mind, but as with everything else, the Fyne Toolkit wants to make sure that you don't have to worry about that in your applications. So we've introduced a selection of new APIs that are going to help with that. Let's start with opening a file using the dialog that was shown at the beginning of the first part of this presentation. Show file open. It's a standard dialog API. It fits with other dialogues. You call that, it will create the dialog for you and then show it to the user in the current window, the window that you specify as the last parameter to this call. The function that you're passing in to the file open is going to return, or rather it was going to call the function when the user returns from the dialog, and it's going to provide information to you that is either a handle to a URI read closer. This represents the source of the data that the user has just selected, or an error. In the standard way, we would check that the error is not nil before proceeding. If it is, You probably need to do something according to the context and the expected user intent at that time. The code illustrated here is just taken from our Fyne demo app, and if there is an error, it shows the error. It's the easiest thing to do in a demo application. If there was no error, we're going to call file open with that URI read closer, and we'll talk more about that next. This is, I think, a pretty straightforward way of asking for the user to choose a file, but the complications probably are in this read closer. Now, there are certain pieces of functionality available. A URI read closer is like a read closer standard Go, which a file, an os.file, is also a read closer. But we are using URIs under the hood to uniquely identify a file or a data source. So the read closer has a URI method that is going to return to you the URI that it represents. And on that we can call things like extension and name. So this code snippet here is illustrating that if we have been given a text file, then we would like to read all of the data out of that file. The data is clearly here saved in the data variable. Also, we have an error again. It's possible that the read doesn't succeed. The user could have picked data that either is not accessible, maybe it's been removed, or any number of other possible things that could have happened that mean that that data can't be accessed. So be sure to always check that error. And also make sure that you close the URI read closer. It must always be closed whether or not you read the data, because it's holding open a native file resource. So make sure that you close it. So that's how we can access data from the user's system that they have chosen. How do we write data out to a selected location? Well, again, we have a dialog that we can use. Show file save is the write equivalent of the read operation, show file open. You can see the code here is very similar. We will be called back when the user makes a selection. They're providing to this callback a write closer and a possible error. Again, check the error, and then we'll handle the details of what to do with that reference in another method that we've called file save. So how do we work with this write closer? Well, there shouldn't be any particular surprises here. We're going to be able to write to it using the standard tools in the Go library. Here we're illustrating with write string. So the contents of the formatted string wrote file at URI and then the result of the URI are written into the location that the user has selected. Of course, here the error accidentally hasn't been checked. You definitely should check the error, but also you definitely need to be closing that URI write closer when you're done. You can see here we've not included any particular reference to be printing in the formatted string, and that's because URI implements a stringer, so it's going to format nicely for you. Just a little helpful thing if you're debugging around this area. So that's how we can work with files when the user is making their selection, but that's not always going to be the way that we want to go. It's often going to be needed to access files directly. Now, we're not talking about embedded or bundled resources, the type of thing that an application is going to use as part of its runtime, but user content, something that's stored external to the application. So you probably were given a URI before. If you imagine a recent files list, for example, you would be aware of when a user makes a selection to open a file. You want to be able to access it later if the user tells you to perform that action. You certainly don't want to force them to go through a selection dialog again. So to do this, we can save the URI for using later. Its ID is stored internally and can be accessed using the string method. Now, this is part of the stringer, and when printing out will automatically be called. But if you're making the selection to be saved, it's a good idea to be very specific about what you're looking for. That's going to save the string representation of the ID. This can be persisted like any other user data, part of your application or document in memory or to the file system. later, you can use this URI to create, you can use this ID to create a new in-memory URI that can be used in part of this API. There's a new package here called storage, which has a lot of functionality for handling input, output, and file management that we're talking through just now. New URI is taking this unique identifier that you have stored and creating a URI object in memory that you can then use some more advanced functionality on. So we have a cross-platform reference now with a bit of functionality. So we can use this to open or save files without using the file dialog. Again, the storage package is key here. We have open file from URI and save file to URI. And these are going to return to you the same type URI read closer or URI write closer, so that you can work in the same way as when the user selected the file. It's quite helpful actually that you can use the same code. It's really just a case of how the selection of where you are getting your data from was handled. So that's how we can access files, how we can have the user select the files to work with. But let's look at what URI types are. What are the data sources that we're talking about here? I mean, it's files, obviously. I mean, that's what we want to access. We can see on the left there, we have a traditional Unix or Linux file descriptor. It's prefixed with file : // and then you have / for the root, a home directory for the user, a directory within that, and a file name. And that might be familiar to a lot of developers who prefer the Linux system or Mac OS. But if you're on Windows, you're going to have something that looks a little bit different. It's going to have a drive letter squashed in there as well. So we need to be aware not to take too many things for granted when we're handling URIs. The file path that you see embedded in some of them might not be exactly what you're expecting. However, it might not be a file at all. A file picker could indeed return something more like this, a content-based URI. This is something that you probably see a lot on Android if you've been developing apps there, or even if you've been running your Fyne apps in Android using these new APIs. The data that you are being returned might be identified by the application it came from and the resource identifier internally. That might look like a file if it is perhaps a file-based application, but it could also be automatically generated. The thing that you can be pretty sure about is that it's going to be a unique ID for that resource. So you can, like before, save that URI for accessing later. But when you do use it later in your application, be sure to check those error returns, because it's entirely possible that that application might have decided that that data is no longer available. It might not be available to you. You may need to say to the user that content is no longer available and display perhaps the file picker again so they can choose an alternative location. Now these are types that you would see if you work on a Fyne application right now, but it's possible that we could be doing any number of other things as well. As the toolkit moves on, we're not limiting to local files and local data. We could be talking about remote resources as well. An HTTP resource across the web. You might be looking up something across a file transfer protocol or an SSH mounted home directory. There's all sorts of possibilities here. We're going to try to keep access to this data readily available under standard APIs so that users have a straightforward interaction no matter where the data is coming from. And the more that your applications can do to step away from the assumption that files can be addressed with a string file path, the more that your applications are going to be portable across systems. So that's the big picture things, how you can work with files and whether it's user selection or stored for later. What is it that the takeaways are, I suppose, when you're managing cross-platform file resources? Well, I'm going to say it again because it's really, really important. The data returned may not come from a file. And even if it does, the URI to that file might not be a file : / prefix. So don't make the false assumption, find the URI returned from the picker, and then use the string with a bit of manipulation to take file off the front and use the standard file IO. It's probably not going to work when you start looking across other platforms. Now that said, if you're in complete control of the runtime environment and you know that these accessed resources are always going to be files, you might choose to do things a little bit differently. But bear in mind what I mentioned earlier, that the Fyne toolkit is not promising that what you get from a file picker will be a traditional file. So it's probably unadvisable to make that assumption. Always check the errors. I am one of those people, as you might have seen in the live code, that we just ignore an error here if we're doing a demo or if we're trying to put together an application quickly. That error is probably not going to happen, or it might not be a problem if it does. In these situations, you're probably following on from a user-initiated action. An error here probably shouldn't go unreported or unhandled. You may not want to tell the user the error that occurred, but you're probably going to want to ask them to provide some alternative source of data by showing the picker again, or by, I think I've seen some applications, for example, recent files say, I couldn't find that file, should we take it out of the list? So there's no unexpected side effects of those errors. Another important thing here is don't hold open a reference to a URI read closer or a URI write closer, just like it would be a bad idea to hold open an os.file. These are resource pointers into the data stream, wherever it's coming from, and whether it's a local file, a remote resource, or something in between. You're going to be holding an operating system resource there, and if your application does so for too long, particularly if it heads into the background, the system might decide that you're not allowed access anymore, and you could get an error midstream, which is not something that we want. So remember, if you want to store, to use the URI inside that instead. You can access it using that URI function, and you can then persist it as its string identifier for use later. I'm going to say it one more time, always close these read closers and write closers. It's very important. You free up the resources, you make sure that you're being a good citizen on the operating system. Just one additional anecdote here is that on some platforms you may find that if you don't close these, then you have extended your permission to access file system resources longer than is actually allowed. And in some extreme cases, the operating system, such as iOS, may decide to terminate your application rather than risk the resource leak further down the road. So make sure to close them. I find that using defer when you make the request, the function called back, check for the error. If the error is not nil, handle it. And then if the returned URI reader closer or write closer is not nil, defer close, and then perform the operations that you wanted to. If you're able to do that, you'll probably miss far fewer close operations that really should be happening. So there we go. That is how to handle file I/O resource management in a way that is cross-platform, that engages the user through dialogues when appropriate, and also manages to connect directly to known resources or previously accessed URIs if the user interaction is not the way to go. I hope that was really useful. It took a long time to get to the API that you saw. We went through various iterations, and I hope you understand that really using os.file wasn't possible for what we're trying to achieve, but what we've got is very close in the way that it functions, and you can often drop a URI read closer or URI write closer in place of a file handle into many of these operations. So you should still make good reuse of your code. Okay, so next up, I'm going to hand over to Anthony, who's got a really interesting presentation about his Canvas API, and I hope that you'll hang around to see that. It's a very pretty presentation. I can't wait to see all of the detail as well. I'll speak to you later.
Hello, everyone. This is Anthony Starks, and I'm delighted. Hello, everyone. Oops, sorry. And I'm delighted to tell you about FC, which is a high-level canvas API for the Fyne Toolkit. Oops, sorry. Hang on. So let's talk about the motivation for a little bit. So I needed to have an API for developers and designers to think in terms of high-level objects that make up a visual display. Those objects are those that are familiar if you're using a modern illustration program like GIMP or Adobe Illustrator. You think in terms of text and images and lines and arcs and circles. And this API should facilitate the artful arrangement of those elements on a scalable 2D canvas. Some of the use cases are information displays, data visualizations, creative coding, if you use things like processing or p5.js, you're familiar with that, and then even presentations like we're seeing today. Here are the elements that are in FC that are supported right now. You've got text at various orientations, left-oriented, centered, and end-aligned. You have a circle, lines, rectangles, and an image. You might think that this isn't very much, but it turns out that combining these things together is very, very useful. There are other objects that aren't supported yet with Fyne that I hope to be supported in the future, like ellipses, arcs, polygons, and curves. And once those are done, I think we can really see some really nice things. But we can do some good things even now. The thing to remember about FC is it works on a percent grid. And the nice thing about this is that it's independent of what your canvas size is. It can scale to whatever canvas size you want, whatever aspect ratio. And you only have to remember numbers from 0 to 100. The other thing to note here is the coordinate system is a little bit different from what you would see in a typical graphics program. It's the one you learned in elementary school, where X increases left to right and Y increases bottom to top. This is also useful when we're doing graphing programs as well. So how you use things on the percent grid is you simply use those coordinates with higher level methods like rectangles, circles, and lines, as you can see here. So for example, the circle is at 50-50, which puts it right in the middle of the canvas. You've got a line that goes from 10-10 to 30-70, and a rectangle from 90-70. So this is how FC works. So what you see on the left is its basic structure. Inside it is a window, a Fyne window, and then a Fyne container with a width and a height. The way you work is you simply position your object and you add it to the container, and Fyne does the rest. Here are the percentage-based methods that are methods on a canvas. You call new canvas and get that object. And then from there, you've got methods to do things with text. As you can see, we've got a similar kind of parameter list. You have the X and the Y and the size. You've got the string, for example, for centered left and end aligned text. You've got the ability to grab the text width. Next, you've got your graphical elements, circles, where you specify the center and the radius. Obviously, you for fill color, you use color.rgba. You've got a couple kinds of rectangles for where you specify the center as well as the upper left corner. You've got lines and images. And finally, you've got the end run, which is just a wrapper to Fyne's method show and run. You do have some convenience methods, and I've been doing this kind of programming for a while, and certain methods show up all the time. So the ability to look up color by name is very useful. So instead of saying RGBA 128.00.255, you just say maroon. So you can do that as well. So you can specify it either way. Mapping a range from one range to the other is very, very useful in graphics programming. So for example, if your world coordinates, if the data is in a certain range, you want to map that to your screen coordinates, in our case of 0 to 100. Being able to do things from polar to Cartesian coordinates is useful when you're doing radial layouts, and also to convert degrees to radians. Here is the hello world for FC. And as you can see, it's pretty simple. You've just got a simple set of imports. You specify the width and the height, a couple of colors. You make your canvas, and then you put three things in it. In this case, we have a circle, some text, and some images, and one image. And it illustrates kind of the layout. So the circle, for example, its center is at 50, which is at the middle of the canvas, and 0, which is at the bottom. It's 100%. Its diameter goes across the entire canvas, and it's blue. You've got center text, which is a quarter of the way up. It's 10%, meaning that it's 10% of your canvas width. You specify the color as well, and then you place the image as well. And you can specify the image scale if you like, just by changing the parameters. That's the hello world. There are other demo and clients for FC. We just saw Hello World. There's one called Confetti, which shows the just random objects. You've got an eclipse, a note to Piet Mondrian. Sun Earth is just a study of the scale of a couple of celestial bodies. And that cloud one is just a way of compositing, in this case, circles, to be able to make other objects. So, as I said, you've got a very few elements, but then you can combine them together to do some very interesting things. As mentioned, there is a charting package as part of FC, and it aims to make scalable, modular, what I call composable charts. And that charts are broken down into their components. You've got the chart types. In that case, you can do bar charts, columns, lines, scatter charts. But charts also have things like titles, axes, and frames. And each of these things have individual methods that you can combine in interesting ways. These are the data structures for FC/chart. The heart of it is a name-value pair, but there's also another element for notes, for example. But the big thing is what I call a chart box, which includes a name-value pair, but also other metadata, like the title of the chart, the color, where it sits on the canvas, its top, bottom, left, and right, its min or max value of the data, and whether the chart is going to be zero-based or not on the canvas. Here are the methods on Chartbox. So you get an IO reader, so that means you can pull your data from anywhere. And it outputs a chart box and an error, which, as Andy said, we should always check. And then we've got methods for the various components, the bar chart, the horizontal line chart, bar chart, line chart scatters, the center title, the frame, the x-axis, and the y-axis. So this shows, the code on the left shows opening two data files, in this case just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to plot the sine and the cosine. So I'm opening, checking for errors from them. Now that I've got my IO readers, I read them into the chart box with the data read method. Again, checking my errors. Once I've got them, now I can combine them. So for example, here I'm doing what I call a composite chart. So I'll start with the frame. We're all going to work obviously on the canvas, the FC canvas. The 5 there means that's the percent opacity. And there's some default values. So for example, I didn't specify the color there because there's some default values that are there. Next, I'm going to lay down the labels. In this case, the x-axis labels. The 1.5 is the size, which is the size relative to the width of the canvas, obviously. The 10 specifies how the interval that I'm going to use. So I'm going to show the label every 10th time. The next one is the y-axis label. Again, I'll specify the size of the text, the range of the data, as well as having the format string. The Boolean there means that I'm going to use the sort of grid that you see there, the horizontal grid. Next, I'll specify my colors. Because I already have my sine and cosine data loaded, I can just make one red and make one green. And then I'll drop in the scatter charts for both of those. If you wanted to composite other kind of data, you can just say, let's say sine.bar, and it will drop the bar chart right there with it. Sometimes you want to composite things together. So this is a case where we have that data before. We're going to specify the position on the canvas, the left and the right, and the top and the bottom. We'll do before. In this case, we'll turn the title on. We'll have a frame. We'll turn on the scatter. So you can see the frame reflects the color of the overall data. And for the one next to it, we'll just offset the how far we're going to do. So we'll shift the left and the right over. We'll keep the top and the bottom the same. And then we'll specify the title, the frame. That's FC chart. One of the reasons why I want this kind of package is to have a viewer for another package that I've built called DeckShell. DeckShell is a way to specify the kinds of things you're talking about, text and graphics and images and so forth, as a script. So for example, the presentation that you're seeing right now is written in DeckShell. So I wanted to have a viewer for that. And here's the Fyne implementation of that. What you see there in the presentation that you see there is another package that I've written called dchart, which also generates deck markup. So you can go lots of different ways. It turns out it was pretty simple once I had the graphics primitives to write a client for DeckShell. So that's all I have right now, and want to thank you for your time. If you'd like to go get it, here is the URL. This presentation is also in that repository in the presentation directory. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Just give me one moment. We'll start this terminal presentation in a couple of minutes, and we will be charging on. Maybe we should have rescheduled things a little bit, and I could have shown the persistence part of the Notes app. Oh well, it's a teaser for the Twitch stream instead. I hope you'll go there and watch it. It's cool to see something put together so simply. Sorry it took a little bit too long. We're nearly there. Okay. Hi, and welcome to the last presentation that we have today. Let's talk about terminals. It's a bit of a bizarre title, perhaps, but FyneTerm is a project that I've been wanting to do for quite some time. Terminal emulators are kind of cool. There's such a variety of them, and from the functional to the beautiful, very specific to one purpose, to the completely broad, could be anything. So I thought that there was an opportunity perhaps to look at one of our own. But why build another terminal emulator? Well, I mean, it's an interesting challenge. The biggest, most difficult software to build is always the best thing to look for, right? I quite like to see how some terminal emulators are put together, and I'd love to contribute to them, but I don't know. The code is just a little bit of a challenge. So given that we're rewriting, a toolkit from scratch so that it can be well designed, put together, there's probably a good chance to see how that toolkit adapts to a big problem like this, a chance to stretch what it was already capable of. So yeah, let's start with a clean code base. Let's have something that's way more maintainable. Let's have tests all the way down, and not just check that theme files load correctly or that a code is handled in the right way, but that really every aspect of it is well tested. We can do that with a modern framework like Fyne. Now, I think that a lot of default terminals, not pointing any fingers at all, aren't all that pretty. They're functional, they're utilitarian type pieces of software that get the job done. And I don't know, I think with retina screens and all of the high-res image manipulation stuff we have around us, it would be great if we could do something in the terminal that looked as good. Lofty ambitions, but it was an idea. And if it could work consistently across platforms, we would be delivering on the same ideas and promises that the Fyne toolkit has, that something that's built once is going to work across all of the supported target platforms. And we have a widget-based toolkit system here. We've talked about extensible widgets and pluggable infrastructure before. So complex applications, maybe an IDE, a developer tool of some sort, might want to embed their own terminal. I know that I've wanted to in the past for previous projects. So if we could provide a terminal widget, that would be pretty cool. So the best test application would be a terminal itself. Yeah. And also, I spend most of my day on the Fyne desk in the Linux system working and interacting with a huge variety of programs. And other frameworks don't adapt in the same way to the screens. They don't have matching themes. It's really tricky to get that. And I thought, well, this would be a really nice addition. So, how exactly is Fyne or Go a good fit for a project like that? Well, we're looking to build good quality, well-tested software. I can't think of a language better than Go that can put that kind of rigor behind something that is still easy to develop, quick to learn, with a really great community. It's a modern language, but it's creating native applications, so we've got the best of both worlds there, I think. String handling and concurrency, they are just light years ahead of C and other languages, which is where most terminal code is currently written. There's modern adaptations of that language, but they're still struggling with some of the same issues under the hood. So again, Go works really nicely for this type of project. We're passing lots of data through, we're doing string processing, and we've got user and back-end systems trying to interact with the same output. This was not really possible before the text grid widget that was introduced in 1.3. Not much of a coincidence there, but we wanted to be able to support complex applications, whether it's a code editor or a terminal. We needed something that was more substantial to be able to show the types of highlights and intricate detail inside the text, where you've got each character is going to be looking different to the one next to it. So the text grid widget provides us that ability. Fyne is able to take care of the graphics handling, which is fantastic. It will open the window and present the canvas on any system. So really all we have to do is the terminal emulation. We work on the details of what's coming in, going out, the state, and ask Fyne to present it for us. So really a lot of the cross-platform stuff is taken care of, except perhaps the terminal part that will, the connecting to the virtual terminal, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Thankfully, Go as an ecosystem has some really great libraries, and they're mostly open source, readily available, and well documented as well. I found this library, which will allow you to connect to Unix virtual terminals, is so easy to use. It allows us to work on Linux and on macOS just out of the box. There's some Windows work underway that maybe has a little bit more work to go, and we're probably going to have to look for other libraries to present shells in other systems where it doesn't have the same concept of virtual terminals, so you might be loading an emulator instead of a terminal connection through to the operating system. But that was a really great start, and I can't thank the guys from that project enough. So to achieve this project, what did we do? Okay, so the project, first of all, we needed a type, a top level type that was going to be the widget, the thing that would be embedded in our terminal application and in other applications. Not particularly imaginatively, but we called it terminal. This implements the Fyne widget interface, and it embeds a text grid, which means that rather than extending text grid, so all we could present was a grid of text, we embedded it so that we can handle other elements such as cursors and overlays. Anyhow, any application that wants to use this calls new terminal, which gives them the widget. They put the widget into their application, and when they want to start running the process of communicating with a virtual terminal behind the scenes, they call term.run. So, I mean, 2 lines of code to embed a terminal in your application. I think that's pretty decent. I'm happy with that. If you were to look at the code for this terminal package, we have split it into a few different files. Terminal, I mean, that's the part above there, it's the main API, a couple of utility functions, so that somebody who's embedding a terminal isn't just getting an area that they have to then hand over completely. They can actually interact with it. There's some functionality in there that would probably be useful if you're wanting to do something smarter than simply embed that widget and forget about it. The input output is one section. This is I guess you might call it the low level stuff. Bytes in, bytes out. It's connecting through to a virtual terminal. You've got the input is the user is typing things in, and we need to communicate that out as well as update the display. And output is what the virtual terminal or the command it's running is going to want to present to the screen. So we would then receive that and update the display as well. Render really takes care of the details of what's going to be displayed. It's positioning that text grid and sizing it appropriately. It's managing the cursor and overlays and other stuff that might appear on or around the text grid. Render really is a widget renderer like you would expect with any widget, but we kept it separate because the code is really quite different, and there was a move potentially down the road in the project to separate widgets from renderers, because one is the state and the renderer is you know, in charge of how it looks. The two really shouldn't be very connected, so we split them apart here. And then escape codes. We need to handle a lot of different functionality that comes through the virtual terminal, and in the bytes we need to look for special characters. So that part of the code is going to peek at all of the data coming through. It's going to look for specific codes or symbols that start an escape code, of which there are 2 or 3. And then it looks for the next one to see if it understands what code might be starting. And at that point it might do something like move the cursor up or insert a specific character. Or it might be introducing a more complex sequence like a color. And so the parser needs to look a little bit more at the data that's coming in as the stream and see if it understands the rest of it, package it up, and that data is passed into an escape code handler, which might then do a color code lookup, a cursor style, and then it feeds this information back to the terminal API through testable methods. So these are quite separate and could be well tested individually. And then if you look at the code, we have an entirely separate package, the command Fyne term folder, which is the actual app. It embeds a terminal type so that it can essentially fill the window with that terminal. And just for a little bit of prettiness that I think is suitable for the terminal application, but perhaps not the embedded mode that other applications might look for, it puts a little background behind. Other things might appear as well. And it's going to handle certain shortcuts, like exiting the terminal for one thing. Probably isn't something that you want to do if the widget has been specifically embedded in another application. So what does that get us? Well, pretty much a fully functioning terminal application. This is the current version, or in fact probably a couple of bug fixes ago. The color scheme is a little bit rudimentary, and we're working on that, but that's showing a full bash terminal with certain commands embedded in. You can see that we have things like the alignment of text set up appropriately, color codes, cursors are being handled, although amusingly it's not actually shown there. The window probably wasn't focused when the screenshot was taken. And I quite like the background under there. Subtle but classy. Folk might want to switch that out at some point, so we'll have to add the configuration. So that's what we got. I think it looks pretty decent. The code is quite nice and tidy, but it was not the easiest of journeys. There were a fair number of challenges that had to be overcome. it is really hard to build a cross-platform application when a Unix terminal is the core of what you're doing. The virtual terminal is an operating system provided channel for managing data through to this concept of a terminal. So on Unix it's great. On Mac OS it works. On some other systems it may be possible to do something similar, but like I said before, it means that it's not fully working on Windows, and on mobile we haven't really figured out how to provide that same functionality. But this is an early project, and I've no doubt but that we'll get there with some brainwaves or more contributions. I'm sure that it truly can be a cross-platform terminal, looking good on all devices. One thing that was a little bit of a graphical challenge was min size. One of the things I think that people find a little bit strange when they come to the Fyne toolkit is that min size is very important. It's the default size for widgets unless you give them more space. We want to make sure that applications are aware of what's visible, how big they need to be to fit the content, and this can be an area of challenge if you're not used to it. Now, the challenge that we had here is that a terminal wants to fill the available space. We saw in the demo there that the text is right aligned. So if you use the standard minimum size, then the window can't get any smaller because we can't go below min size. If we get bigger, it will expand quite correctly, but then will be a bigger size that can't get smaller. So the way that we embedded this text grid, we actually had to override that. The widget that embeds it has its own understanding of what minimum size is, which is really kind of small. And it is adjusting the text grid at the background. The min size for the text grid is really metadata, and we can choose to ignore it or to use it. But to the canvas, to the window, we're saying actually the min size is far smaller than the space required for the text, because when the window does get smaller, we will then shuffle the content, the text grid, and make sure that the text in the terminal is shuffled down accordingly. Which leads to the next challenge. We had the graphical output, which was a set of text cells with a specific number of rows and columns, and we have cursor position, which you can clearly see. However, a virtual terminal also has understanding of size. You need to communicate to it how many rows and columns it has. Things like your top application is going to be as big as is available, so the terminal knows certain things about its output. And so just by updating our graphical representation doesn't actually change things. We had to coordinate those. And the cursor was a similar challenge. Moving around a cursor on the front end needs to reflect back so that certain operations occur in the appropriate memory space. We have had a bit of a challenge with performance as well. If you make your terminal really big, it has many thousands of objects visible, because every piece of text and every background to a piece of text is a separate graphical object. Now these are cached, and if you aren't making massive changes to the content, it's not going to be a problem. However, when you refresh a widget, the default thing that it does is refresh all of the child items inside it, because we're not specific about what changed. So we had to work a little bit with the text grid so that you could refresh only one character at a time, and then inside the text component it's able to realize, right, well, we just need to refresh the textures for 2 components there, not for thousands of them. That's a work in progress actually, so the performance will improve vastly, although it is actually pretty decent at the moment. The overhead for the graphics processing varies platform to platform, so on macOS it's a little bit sluggish, but on a Linux system it seems pretty speedy. Probably wouldn't recommend running that on a Raspberry Pi right now though, until we've addressed some of those issues. And the last challenge was escape codes. They're really complex. There's a huge amount of documentation about escape codes. There's ASCII codes and ANSI codes, and specific for certain terminals and certain terminal emulators. There's standards and there's extended standards, and there's not particularly standard but very common areas. And sometimes this documentation conflicts. So our tests are very useful. It means that we are validating the behavior, but sometimes we're validating the wrong behavior because the documentation wasn't very clear. So it is actually something where you have to run the terminal, load your favorite commands and see how they behave. Bash was pretty straightforward, the very clear standard codes that it utilizes, and ZSH was great to get started. And then I plugged in one of the more complex ZSH themes that uses some extended codes that aren't so common, and there are clear areas that we could extend that support to give a more complete output. And also there are small sets of standard color codes, which you saw in the screenshot there, but actually there are hundreds of different codes that could be supported. So we've got to identify what a color code is and then figure out whether we understand what that number of code for color represents. Some of them we match quite nicely, others we need to look more into, and then extended code sets can indicate more complex interpretations of the same numbers. So you could have a code that says invert the next code, and then that color code has to be inverted. So it's a more complex state engine than perhaps was realized when the escape code work was first put together. But those challenges have mostly been overcome. The terminal is working well, but there's so much more that I think that we could do, or that I would love to do with this project. Firstly, scrolling. It is currently resizable, but in the scrollback sense, a fixed terminal. If something disappears off the top, then it's gone. Handling scrolling efficiently with huge amounts of data, graphical elements, is actually something closely related to work going on in 2.0. So it's possible that we might not be able to get a good scrolling implementation until that release has come a little bit closer. It's probably a little bit too complex to solve just in the application. Like I mentioned before, a full color set would be pretty good. Some of the terminal themes that you see are really gorgeous when they get the colors blended nicely, a little bit beyond the 16 color version terminal I have set up at the moment. User preferences, it's got to be something we put in there. The framework is there. The Fyne Preferences API could handle it all for us. And whether we include themes in the way that themes are handled for Fyne, possibly not, or whether it is local files or resources, user preferences, haven't really figured it out. But to be able to specify that would be cool. Standard set of colors, absolutely, but if everything on your system is set up as solarized dark, for example, or if you have a custom theme for FyneDesk and all of your Fyne applications, then maybe you want to match that in your terminal color set as well. So I'd love to see that added. Optimizations. There is a lot to do here to make it performant across lots of different systems. I think the majority of the work is in, well, half of the work probably is in TextGrid, and we're working through that at the moment. And the other half is probably with being smarter about the terminal output coming through the virtual terminal connection. It's kind of being dumped to screen and then forgotten about, but if we were to buffer it in text, probably could do much smarter change handling so that we only ask the screen to redraw the stuff that really has changed since the last frame. I think that'll really help. And then do need to add support for some of the less common escape codes. Not all colors. There are certain things about copy-paste handling and specific terminal functionality that some commands look for. It may not be necessary to support them all, but we should at least identify them all and know whether they need to be implemented or not. For one thing, it keeps the errors off the command line because we currently mark a code that we found that didn't make any sense. We should definitely respect all of those ones we find. And it would be really nice to do something cool with some smart content, not just text-based output, but to do something like graphical previews or more interactive items, hyperlinks or whatever. There's some really great examples like this. Terminology is a project that I love. Part of the Enlightenment project, and they have done amazing things like dropping graphical files inline when you ls. given that we are backing to a graphical canvas, we could do a huge amount of cool things there. I think that it's really the ideas, the innovation there, what can we do, is the complex part. Rendering it, putting it out to screen should be pretty straightforward with a solid toolkit underneath this. Well, I hope that's interesting. If you're on Linux, you should totally check out the Fyne Term project right now. If you're on Mac, you could look at it and help us out with some of the optimizations there. It might not be something that you use every day at the moment, but it's getting close. Thanks for listening. This has been really interesting to run through. I'm very excited to share it with you. And we will move on in just a couple of moments to the road ahead. We'll just let the clock sit there for a couple of minutes and see if anybody additional joins us. We're running a bit ahead of schedule, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. I will just get cracking. If anybody was going to join us specifically on the hour, we'll be sharing these videos individually later on. So if you miss the beginning or something, don't worry at all. The live feed will be available for a while, and then afterwards we'll chop up all of the videos into individual segments and make a playlist of all of the available videos, so not a problem at all. I don't think we've missed any questions right now. Oh, there were a couple there. Some great feedback on the channel. Thanks everybody for all of your attention. It's been really great to present this to you today. Wow, what a great day of presentations and idea sharing. I hope that everybody's learned something interesting. I know that I have. Maybe even been inspired to build your first cross-platform app or start that project you've been dreaming of. Fyne enables a lot of interesting projects, and hopefully there's something there for everybody. For the last session today, I wanted to spend just a few minutes showing what we have planned for the road ahead. Version 2.0 is what we are setting our minds on now. It's where there's an opportunity to make our next big improvements. As our community grows, we're seeing lots of great ideas come in. We've tried to incorporate a lot of them in this plan. It's not definitive, and it's also not finalized either. There will be more things coming in. We might find that certain items just aren't possible in the way that you'd hoped, or that we had imagined. Question earlier today was, is there a video widget? Well, we haven't actually found a video library that we can include that allows us to keep the really permissive licensing that allows you to use this project for whatever you want. So there's elements like that we have to think a little bit more carefully about. So I'm going to present to you what we hope, and you can follow the project and see how that evolves. So let's just look at a couple of those things in a bit more detail. For anybody who's been following presentations from the community or from the Fyne team or last Fyne Conf, you'll have heard us talk about data binding. This is something that we've been working on for quite some time, and version 2 is where we expect that to land. So I'll touch more on that later on. Flexible theming. We've had a fair bit of feedback from you that the themes themselves aren't quite easy enough to work with. The widgets adhering to the theme is working okay, we believe, but projects are looking for, I'd prefer this change, or larger fonts, or different color in this area. So we're going to be working on that so that we can stick to material design with a really great out-the-box feeling, but with more of those app-specific customizations that people have been looking for. Animations is something that I'm really looking forward to getting into the project. The image support that we have doesn't support animated GIFs because we don't have that animation loop. I know that a number of people have worked on areas like that, and it's possible to run animations in your application, but we would like to have it really core so that interactions feel a little bit more responsive, transitions, maybe navigation sliding around like you might expect on a mobile platform. So we'll see how some of that stuff comes in. Also, there's work begun on a GUI builder. Now, the run-through that I did, the live coding session, was supposed to illustrate that it's really easy to pull something together. The API is aiming to be very explicit so that what you type clearly matches what you see. But there's a lot of things to discover, and as the toolkit builds out, we're going to find that perhaps there's just too many APIs for somebody new to the project to really discover. Now, a GUI builder is going to help in that area so that it can present to you all of the options available. When you drop something in, you can see immediately how it's going to work. Now, this is really just to set up your initial application so that you can export the code. It's not designed to be an interactive development runtime debug type of thing. That we're really looking at solid APIs, unit testing as the way to validate your application, but it could be a really great way to get people started or to build out a proof of concept or that complex API for your next application. There's some new widgets that we're going to be trying to include as well. Mostly this is built on top of data binding, and that's why they haven't been there so far. The list, we've shown boxes before that can pack items that you specify into an interface, but list is more about the data bound. If you have 10,000 elements, you don't want to obviously have to load all of those and then scroll through them. It'd be a terrible user experience through speed and possibly other elements, like you'd have to figure out all of that content to do a search or something. So we're using the new data binding to figure out how to more efficiently and intuitively present these complex elements. So list is the obvious one. Tree, which would be a hierarchical list in essence, but probably a separate widget for usability and perhaps implementation reasons. And table, like a data table where you've got different width columns. It's not really easy to do with the existing widgets, and to be able to tap on a header and sort data, that's going to be really important for data-based applications. There's some work on the go. Charles and a few others have said, hey, this one works for me, and it's great to see the innovation in that space. We just need to make sure that it's really slick so that we can handle the types and volumes of data that are going to make the difference in your applications. There's a few things that really we want to fix as well. We've had to hold off on these because they might or probably will be slightly breaking changes, and version 2 really is the first time that we've had, I suppose, given ourselves permission to make any break in the API whatsoever. Every previous release has been backwards compatible. We now have the infrastructure in place through documentation and testing to be able to make explicit changes as long as they have really trivial paths forward for anybody who's using that functionality. So entry scrolling is one of those things. You wouldn't have thought it, but you can, the entry expands to fit the text because of the way that min size works. You can put a scroller outside entry so that it doesn't expand your application. But we can't do clever things there like make sure the cursor is always visible. So we're going to bring scrolling into entry and a couple of other widgets that behave similarly, so that we can do the more intuitive things like have cursor visible and allow more advanced scroll capability and better APIs for controlling that. Another thing is, as high DPI displays have become more prevalent, we've realized that scaling is a really difficult part of getting this right, but also that addressing at a simulated pixel level or device independent pixel makes for a great output scale. But what if you have a really high density display? You want 3 pixels or a square of 9 pixels in place of every one virtual pixel. Then if you want to move something very, very slightly across the display, it's going to jump those 3 pixels, and you're not going to get the full benefit of the high DPI display. Your images and your fonts and all of the parts of the display are going to look great, but the animations aren't going to be smooth. So we're going to add some more precision to the internal coordinate system so that you can get that beautifully smooth transition across the essentially sub-pixel addressing, although that's not technically what it is. And it would be pretty cool to include a few more things as well. This is like massive scope, but the community is just amazing. I've got confidence we can get a huge amount of this stuff in. So we would love to see things like browser-based delivery, running your Fyne apps in a browser. Input validation is another thing that people have been talking about. We don't have a work in progress right now, but it should be possible to include that alongside theme improvements. We couldn't really do it without breaking the theme API, so we've held off until 2.0 to do it right, so that the validation is a graphical feedback. It's not just text being displayed inside your applications. We'd love to do drag and drop properly, not just within an application, but dragging files and icons and data types into your window and back out again. And this helps with certain complexities about launching macOS apps with files being dropped into them at launch time. So it'll be great to get that all tidied up as well. And probably the most lasting request for system tray. There are system tray libraries out there, so for a while we've said just go use one. But now that we have menus and submenu support, it seems like a good time to try and figure out how to really encapsulate that into the APIs that we have, so it's fully supported and works just out of the box. So a bit of an overview there about what we're hoping to achieve, or what I would love to be able to deliver as part of this big update. And a few of these items are already underway, so I wanted to share with you where we've got to. The data binding, like I mentioned, is something that we have been working on. If you saw Fyne Conf last year, or if you went to or saw the videos of GopherCon Australia, you would have seen Steve presenting his first version of data binding. And we've been building on that, and we've had a lot of backwards and forwards about how to do that right. It turns out it's really difficult to get the balance between ease of use and the true capability of a data binding API. We need to get that right so that it fits the same simplicity but powerful nature of the other Fyne APIs. We're going to need to adapt widgets so that they can take the complex binding types if that's what you would like, but also to work with the simple types that make it so straightforward to put together a simple application. So thanks to Stuart, who's been jumping in and helping out with that. Between Stuart and Steve, I think we've got really close to a solution here. And if you can excuse the quality on this GIF, there's a little preview about how that might work. So here you can see on the left we have an input where the data is bound to input controls, and on the right we have the same, and in the middle there is an output. These are essentially read-only controls that are changed through APIs in the application, and all of them are staying in sync with very simple APIs behind the scenes where one widget is bound to a data type, and then another widget is, and then another widget is. With internal management of that and only read-only types, it's a very simple thing, straightforward, one-way data binding. But we want to do the two-way data binding you see here, so that if anybody in the user interface changes a value, then it will replicate across the application as well, which adds a little complexity, but really is a very powerful piece of functionality, and really excited to see that land. Next, we're thinking about theming and it's been really great to have some feed in here from the community. The application that you see here is from Kyosuke. Apologies for the pronunciation there. He worked on this theme generator, and it really, I think, embodies the spirit of what we're trying to do with the next version of the theme. We want to keep that great user interface, the consistent approach, stopping the ability to do terrible things like text clashing with background colors so it can't be read, or loading icons at the wrong resolution so it just looks terrible. And if we can include flexibility within the standard theme system, then that seems like a great balance. So we have this little video of this application which works right now. You can go to that GitHub URL and see it for yourself. We'll just see that play through. Pretty cool functionality there, and the way that this is currently working, you make the changes, it can show you in real time how it's going to look, and then you save that theme file into your code. I think that the final implementation is going to probably be more about a data file or some information, so that it's not saving source code that you then have to import into your application. But we'll see. There's many different ways to take this, and we'll obviously be looking for the approach that makes most sense for the API, for the end of user, the developer of the applications. And so then also really great proof of concept here, technology preview that Cedric has been working really hard on. I just love how great this is. It's tantalizingly close. But unfortunately, the technologies that it's built on are just not quite there yet to be able to deliver the quality that we hold this toolkit accountable to. Anyhow, what you see is a live preview of a Fyne application. In fact, it's Fyne Demo. You might recognize it from a couple of versions ago. I think this screenshot was built from. The project here that's embedding it in the browser is a fork, so it's running a little bit behind. However, this is a standard Fyne application. There's no alteration to your source code. It's just compiling to a new target. So here we're compiling to WebAssembler. It's creating a package around it that can be booted in a server-based web environment. So then anybody who hits that URL, apologies, it's been blanked out. I didn't want to overload anybody's development server. But it's rendering the application across the browser and then running on the client. This is something that people have been asking for a long time. I really hope we can get it included in this next big release, but it is going to be dependent on some of the tools that we're working with, and we'll keep you posted regarding this one. It's another project that we have hinted at for some time, and I have a feeling that we're probably close enough now that it could be a reality. So thanks everybody for all of the things that you've contributed to the work in progress there that we've been able to include in this little preview. So the plan and roadmap going forward from here. Whilst I said V2 is the main focus, and that is true, there are a number of us that are working hard on a bug fix release before that. There has been a huge amount of change in the 1.3 release to make some of the rendering improvements, window sizing and scaling adjustments. We had to write a lot of new code in the render pipeline, which is always a scary thing to do because it's the part that's hardest to be tested. And as a result, there are certain bugs that have arisen that we really need to fix. A couple of devices and graphics cards that really don't like the new process quite so well. So thanks everybody for your feedback. I think most of the issues have been already addressed. Maybe there's 2 or 3 remaining. We'll try to get a 1.3.1 out relatively soon so that everybody's back up and running on all the systems that we do list as fully supported. And some of the others that are almost there, I think we can probably get closer with a little point release. Next up would be to agree what we're going to try and work on in the 2.0 release. I've showed you a huge amount. We probably can't actually deliver all of that in one major update. But of course, the more people on the project, the more help that we have in building and testing and scoping these things out, the better. We need to figure out what we're going to try and work on, not because we want to write this plan down in stone, but because we want to know what to focus on. So if somebody comes into the project and says, what can I do? We can point them at stuff that's really going to make the difference for the next release. Aiming for something around September or October, later this year anyway. There is obviously a huge amount of challenging situations in the world right now. I thank everybody for being here today and for all of the contributions across the community that we've had. I can't say how much it means to me and to the team that people are able to be involved when there's so much going on in life and in the world. And so all of the milestones that we have right now, I think, really are with the understanding that certain things might get in the way, but this is, I think, what we're kind of aiming towards. More details will come later. And around that, I think it's likely that we'll continue our regular-ish release schedule, which is to see a major release each quarter and a point release roughly each month. It seems like a good rhythm. It's not final, it's not how we will work, but it seemed to be pretty decent at the meantime. It will probably depend on the 2.0 stuff that comes in, how much we need to put in place for certain big changes that it requires. But I think it probably makes sense as a model going forward, and you can certainly follow the project in our Twitter feed for updates. Also, I would love to put more time into the app list website that we have at apps.fyne.io. There are, I think, about 12 applications up there that show some of the activity in the community. It's a chance to showcase open source applications, ones that are cool or useful, and it would be great to get more up there. If you feel your application is missing, please get in touch, point us to your project, and we'll see if we can get that added. Also, kind of a big announcement. It was very, very exciting to see that GitHub has told us we have 10,000 stars. This is just so amazing. I'm really excited. It's been a huge amount of effort and so many people involved. I can't even name everybody. It's a fantastic community working really hard to achieve something that matters. So it's great to have this reflected in our project. So thanks for that. Really excited to see that badge up there. And in, I think, less than 2.5 years, we've gone from an idea built by somebody who didn't really know the language that they were learning to build this out to something that really works and hopefully is a big part of underpinning exciting projects going forward. And so do let us know what is working for you, what you're trying to build, and how the project could be part of your project and the vision that you have for that. Thanks so much, everybody, for listening. It's been really great to share this with the wider community. I hope that you found the event enjoyable and helpful. Thank you again to our wonderful speakers and to the sponsors in the community that made this possible. If you'd like to learn any more, we've got a Q&A session coming right up after this, which we can talk about anything that was discussed during the presentations or something that we missed. But before I go, if you would like to get involved in the project, here's some really useful URLs. We have our new developer documentation website that was mentioned earlier, and also our YouTube channel, which you probably found if you're watching this live. We're going to be putting these videos up in individual sessions later on, but for now the live feed will remain available to play again if you missed anything. If you would like to get involved and contribute to the project, we're just looking for anybody who's excited about what we're doing. You don't need to be excited about doing the code, or you don't even need to know how the code works. If you want to test or design something for it, do some documentation, we'd be really excited to have you on board. You can see on our GitHub project how you might contribute. It's got various hints there, and obviously you'll find all of the code. It's all open source, very permissively licensed, so you can just get involved and try what you would like. Also, thanks again to our existing sponsors. This is a fantastic opportunity to welcome perhaps some new sponsors. It's not possible to run a project like this without sponsorship, and we appreciate every person who's contributed anything from $1 to 1,000, whatever. If it's a monthly contribution or a one-off, we're just hugely grateful. And also, we have stickers. If you would like to provide a sponsorship, I think above the $5 mark, then there's a couple of stickers would be sent in the post. Just don't forget to send us privately your address so we can send you those stickers. And if you are looking to do a Fyne-based application in a business environment, or you would like some more dedicated support that perhaps the community is not the right place, please do head over to Fyne Labs. It's a business that's helping to support the project. It's managing our finances. It's holding the sponsorship that comes in, so we don't have to worry about the corporate governance side of things. We can just continue with the community, the open source, all of that side of things. But they're available if you would like some more kind of business oriented help, or if you just want somebody to go and look over your code. There are various options as well that Fyne Labs is available, but also there's a support page on the Fyne.io website that describes the various ways that you could perhaps get help from the community as well. So with that, I would just say again, thanks very much everybody for being here. We're going to go to our Q&A session now on the Jitsi server. Here you see the URL. It's also linked from our website if this slide goes away. And I will see everybody there for a bit of chat, answer some questions and discuss the future of the project. Thank you again ever so much. I'll see you next time.